Tēnā rā koutou I ngā manikura o te motu. Tēnei au he uri o hini ahuoni e aro pīkare nei ki te hā o tō tātou tūpuna whaia. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai Pāho and Irirangi Te Motu, New Zealand on Air. What's a woman's worth? It's the question of much debate over the last week after the government pushed through its Equal Pay Amendment Act under urgency. The changes make it harder for female-dominated workforces to achieve pay equity with male counterparts. It's a move that's caused outrage among unions, with 33 existing claims being scrapped. Coalition partners have been crowing that it will save the government billions, but at whose expense? The MPs who've made the decision are about to get a substantial pay rise, while the people who clean Parliament don't make a living wage. So what do the changes mean for our lowest paid wāhine workers? Hei whakamārama I ngā pānga o tēnei ture, kua tatū mai, ko te hekere tari āmotu o te uniana e tū, ko Rachel Mackintosh. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, kia ora.
Run us through the main points that come out of this legislation.
The equal pay legislation. So it's extinguished 33 current claims covering well over 100,000 working people, mostly women. It has shifted the goalposts and raised the bar. And a quick legal analysis, like it'll take time to fully work it out, but a quick legal analysis has pretty much shown that there will be no successful pay equity claims under this legislation. They've just made it so difficult. Yeah. And
talk us through that. Why does the legal analysis make that judgment that there will be no equal pay claims under this new legislation?
Well, one of the things is that market forces have to be taken into account, and you have to prove that it wasn't market forces, whereas at the moment there's an assumption that you have to disprove, so it's basically flipping it on its head. You have to prove merit before you can even get started, whereas at the moment the merit is discovered through the process. So you can't start the process until you've done something that requires a process, which makes it impossible. You have to start from the point at which a job became female-dominated, which that makes it pretty much impossible for most occupations. There's no point at which they first became female-dominated. So there are just so many things they've done to make it impossible.
We've heard a lot of kōrero and wānanga from some fairly high-paid wāhine at the moment. But tell me, what is the response of women who are in these roles and jobs and who are part of these claims?
There's kind of rage and disbelief and a deep feeling of insult and of having something that felt as though it was in reach whipped away, a feeling of being undervalued, which is the whole point of pay equity, is about value, and the fact that there's whole workforces and hundreds and thousands of mostly women workers who their work has been considered to be of low value over time, basically because of sexism.
The government's argument is not a single worker is having their pay cut, that they won't see any difference in their bank account. Do they have a point?
Well, the point is that people need to see a difference in their bank account. They need to have a pay increase. And so it's future pay cuts that we're talking about, and that was the hope. That's the hope that has been whipped away. So if somebody wants to call billions of dollars whipped away and taken out of the possible pay packets of women workers, if people want to call that a pay cut, it's not that much of a stretch, really.
Is it even legal for some of these people to have a pay cut, because wouldn't they be on minimum wage anyway?
Yeah, so the pay cut is a future pay cut that we're talking about. If you're on minimum wage, absolutely you can't have a pay cut.
The government also argues the existing legislation and its use of comparators is unworkable. You've been working with it. Some of these claims have been underway for over 1,000 days now. that doesn't suggest a streamlined or efficient process.
It is a complex process, and there's a whole lot of power and so on at play as well. But this is a government saying that who recently wound up the pay equity task force because they said it wasn't necessary because the system was working. That was just a few months ago, and now they're saying it's not working. But also the attack on comparators really is an attack on the whole principle that work that is female-dominated is undervalued because of that reason. And comparators are about work that mostly men do that is different. And what you compare is the responsibility, the skill, the effort, and the knowledge that you need. And yes, the skill can be different, and yes, the responsibilities can be different. But in care work, the responsibility for the dignity of another human being is immensely important and has been considered not valuable in the past because it's mostly women that do that. But I can't think of anything more valuable than giving another person dignity.
Can you give me an example? Because the Prime Minister has been talking about the comparisons and how you can't compare librarians to other roles. Give me an example of the comparisons you're using.
Sure. So for care work, one of the comparisons is prison guards. And so prison guards also deal with complex human interactions. They deal with violence, as do care workers. They are responsible for people's safety, as are care workers. And so it's those kind of comparators. Those kind of comparisons and that consideration of complex human interactions and, skill and responsibility, that's how the comparators work. And it's not that the work is the same.
And what is the difference in pay?
The difference for prison guards, I think it was maybe 20%. Actually, what we concluded was that prison guards are also underpaid because prison guards are paid less than fisheries officers. And the kind of value when you use a job evaluation that is based on non-sexist factors, you have care workers at the bottom, then you have prison guards, and then you have fisheries officers who are paid more.
How much money are we talking about? The government won't say, citing commercial negotiations and the like, but at the same time there are claims by the ACT party that they've saved the budget billions. So how much money are we talking about?
That is actually quite hard to know, and because you have to maintain it over years, that does cost money. And the point of pay equity is that you don't ask, is it affordable? You ask, is it right? So, yeah.
Are you able to offer some examples of the low-paid wages that we're talking about, like a librarian could see what kind of pay rise, a health worker, a teacher?
So I can talk about care workers because that's the claims that our union's been involved in, and it's looking like 30% is the kind of average wrong pay that people are suffering at the moment. And that's after having got a boost in 2017 from the Christine Bartlett case. But unless you keep on it, it just slips away. So, yeah.
30% is a lot of money. What difference would that make for a family?
It just makes a huge difference. So we hear in our union from lots of care workers and from lots of other workers who have had big boosts. And it's the difference between not being able to enrol your kids in sport, not being able to buy them a pair of shoes, choosing between paying your power bill and paying your rent, those kind of things. Just to have enough to live on is not to have to worry about the basics and to have a little bit of extra so you can do something nice from time to time.
Are these the families that are relying on school lunches and other policies or
yes,
considerations that are under threat or are being having budget constraints?
Absolutely. So the the debacle of the school lunches, which is, cynical cost saving at the expense of children who need a decent meal at school, is part of it. But the whole kind of austerity approach of this government to cut and undermine public services, that's like the social wage that also is part of people's lives and is way more important for people on low incomes than it is for other people.
What kind of take-home does a care worker get?
Care worker gets, I haven't done the maths, but $30 an hour, it would be over the top. So the top about 29, so a little bit above the living wage. But yeah, so not enough to live on, basically, not enough to live on with dignity, which is why people work really long hours, work multiple jobs. Yeah.
The Finance Minister wrote a column where she said, and I quote, "What started as pay equity regime had become a Trojan horse for a multi-billion-dollar grievance industry driven by public sector unions." Your response?
I just find that so interesting because that word grievance, what I immediately think of when I hear that is the treaty grievance industry. And the point about grievance is that that's about wrong and harm that has been done. And so to use that word as an insult is an insult because there is a grievance to have been undervalued. There is a grievance that people who are responsible for how much you get paid don't think that it's important for you to have enough money to live on. That if that's not a grievance, I don't know what is. And to use grievance as an insult, I just think is so insulting.
Are you getting support from, the public? As you say, everyone's busy doing their own thing, and there's not often a lot of room or consideration for others. But on this one, on pay parity, what kind of responses are you hearing from the general public? Massive
amounts of support. In fact, we had a rally outside Brooke Van Velden's office last week, and I saw a woman in her 80s, a friend of my mother's, who said, "I have not been on the streets for decades, but this is making me incandescent with rage." We also the Union for Miners, and the miners have said, if you need us down in Parliament with our high-vis jackets on to support the women who have suffered this insult, then we are there. So, yeah, really wide positive response from members of the public.
And are you likely to take those offers up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we will. Yeah.
What might that look like?
Definitely mobilising. Mobilising is only one thing. There is the plans are kind of developing. We need to keep the momentum up on this issue because it's an outrage, and one of the things that we're talking about is a travelling select committee, which illustrates the fact that not only is this law incredibly damaging, but also it was done without due process. To take a shadow select committee around the country and make sure people have the opportunity to tell their stories, tell about what the effect would be on them and their supporters. So these are some of the things. And there will certainly be events where people are in the streets. People will be telling their stories. People will be making sure that this is not forgotten.
This all comes at a time when MPs are in line for a pay rise. Brooke Van Velden, Nicola Willis and their cabinet colleagues who signed off on killing pay equity in its current form will get another $7,500 a year. The argument from MPs will be that their wages were independently decided. So should a similar system apply to everyone?
Well, from a union point of view, wages should be decided by collective negotiation. So really we need to have a system where everybody has the power to collectively negotiate decent pay rises every year.
In terms of the living wage or the minimum wage, though, should an independent commission do that instead of Parliament?
So the living wage is an independent process that is done by academics and civil society, and that's really important that remains completely independent from Parliament. But for the actual minimum wage, what we would like to see is a tripartite process that is not just the minister deciding, but employers, unions and government getting together and arguing it out every year so that there is a workers' voice in what the minimum wage should be.
Are any politicians warm to that idea?
That remains to be seen.
Nicola Willis also wants to axe 1/3 of 71 rules for getting government contracts. Those rules include paying the living wage in contracts for cleaning, catering and security guards. What's the impact of not earning a living wage on workers you represent? You know, we've talked about the cleaners, but I guess generally as a cohort of people who might come under those new regulations.
Yeah, well, what a living wage is enough money to live with dignity. So it's to not worry about your essentials and be able to have, you know, a nice life, not just be worried paycheck to paycheck every time. And that move to remove the requirement for a living wage, that is a slap against a whole society, because there was many years of campaigning to get that rule put in, the requirement for a living wage. And that wasn't just the cleaners and the security guards and the caterers themselves, it was their communities, it was their faith groups, their churches, mosques, synagogues and community groups all banding together and campaigning over years to get that rule put in. So the effect on those people's lives is the direct impact. And then the flow-on effect of that, because when you don't have enough money to go out and buy yourself a coffee, the person running that small business making coffees doesn't get that income. So there's a contracting effect every time the government reduces the ability of people to earn money. That has a flow-on effect to everybody.
Does it affect the aspiration of a government to have a high-wage economy? We hear that a lot. And how would you characterise the employment environment at the moment?
There are severe constraints on wage growth at the moment, and when you start with austerity from the government, that's what happens. 10,000 public service jobs have been cut. That increases the number of people looking for work. That makes it harder for the people in work to negotiate pay increases, and it really is a downward spiral. So the irony of removing the right to a living wage from those parliamentary workers as part of your project to lift wages, it's just completely nonsensical.
What about the companies who employ these people? What's their response to the unions and, the push for a living wage? Well,
that varies. But in general, employers are human beings as well. And the people who employ those cleaners, they always say they would like to pay people properly. But when you take away the requirement, then there's pressure on those companies because they're bidding for contracts. That's how that works. And there's a whole lot of costs they don't have control over. They can't control the price of granola. But if they've got the ability to control the price of wages, then that's what they will do in order to get the next contracts.
There are IRD stats said in 2024 Māori women earn 21% less than Pākehā men. It's 24% for Asian and Pacifica women. How do you move that needle?
One of the big mechanisms for that is sector-wide standards. So the previous government had fair pay agreements. We hadn't settled a single one, and they got whipped away. But those gaps get worse the more atomised and individualised the market is. And so everything that can be done to promote collective bargaining that's what can make a difference. So a fair pay agreement for Māori and Pacific-dominated workforces that really lifts that pay up, that starts to close the gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The budget is near. There are now 37,000 more unemployed people than at the last election. Māori Pacific people's employment is now over 10%. Employment fell in manufacturing, construction, retail, education and healthcare. What do you want to see in the budget to address that?
We want a government that spends its own money because all that money will flow on. We want a government that invests in that. We want a government that invests in good industrial policy so that the future of those industries can be considered, and planning, skills development, and the involvement, and basically putting people at the centre of all those so that there can be decent work. That requires investment. But essentially, we want a government that invests in good public services and funds pay equity, funds the things that the government is able to fund so that everybody wins, and that the money that starts circulating around the economy, that starts with the government, which is the biggest spender in the country, has a flow-on effect to everybody else.
The government is saying that they will fund pay equity, but they're just resetting the process. What's the time frame? Obviously, it's not happened yet, but if you had a looking glass, could you kind of guesstimate what that might look like?
Well, they say they'll fund pay equity, but they've called into question whether low wages and female-dominated work really is about sexism. Like that's one of the first things they've done. They've cast aspersions at that. They've made it much harder. They've said that you can't take a claim within 10 years of a previous claim. So the timeline is, if anybody can ever reach it, it's a very long. But then, we have these doubts that anybody will ever be able to reach it.
Mm. If we can talk a little bit about work safety, Brooke Van Velden has been busy. She's also removing a bunch of requirements for small businesses around worker safety, saying that they only need to manage, quote, critical risks and provide basic facilities to ensure worker welfare. What do you make of that move?
That is saying that, 25% of our workforce work for small employers. That is saying that those people do not merit having proper workplace health and safety. It is flying in the face of the Royal Commission that came out of the Pike River disaster, and what we learned then, well, actually what we already knew, but what that commission stated very clearly is that if you want people to come home safely from work, if you want good health and safety, you have to have strong worker participation. And the changes that essentially mean that a small employer, if they've got a book on their shelf that talks about health and safety, that will be enough. The actual real situation won't be considered their responsibility. That is going to mean that people will get injured. That is going to mean that people will get killed.
To speak about comparisons again, if we look to Australia, what is the comparison between workers who, die in the workplace over there compared to here?
I think it's four times as likely to die or get sick at work here than in Australia. And Australia has a much stronger worker participation.
And who pays for that? Is that ACC?
Who pays for
the cost of, the accidents and...
ACC, the health system, and, that's just the money cost. It's like the cost to people's families, to lives, to people who can't do the same work any longer because they're injured. You can't measure that.
Just thinking in places like Taranaki and Kawerau, where industries are closing off now or will close in the next decade or so, are we paying enough attention to investing enough money into getting workers and regions ready for the future?
Absolutely not. So that's another thing that we would like a government to do, which is take transition seriously, to take, what is going to face us. There is climate change, there are other things. There's technological change, there's demographic change, and you can plan for that. You can consider the future. You can invest in training and in planning for, green technology futures, for what kind of country we want to live in. And in order to create that country, what do people need to be doing? That's at the fundamental level, and then plan for that and think, okay, these are the jobs we're going to need if this is the kind of country we want, and that requires requires investment. It requires spaces for the people of this country to have their voices heard about what they would like to see the future, and then, getting that all together and making a plan and investing in it.
Rachel, just quickly, if you could, do you have a plea for Nicola Willis and Brooke Van Velden in terms of, on behalf of these wahine in these sectors?
The plea is fund pay equity and keep the living wage requirement for parliamentary workers. Basically, listen to the stories of these workers, listen to the stories, and then act accordingly. The government is the body that has the power to fund pay equity. They have the power to fund jobs for all those people who are contracted to them.
Tēnā koe, Rachel. Thank you for your time.
Kia ora.
I te whakarongo koutou kia Rachel Mackintosh, he kiretari āmotu mo te uniana e tū. Ko ngā matarau o ngā kaupapa tini te aronga o tēnei pāhotanga, mā tā koutou huri mai e ora, e whai take, nō reira tēnā rā koutou katoa. Tēnei te mihi ki te Māngai Pāho, me irirangi te motu, nā rāua tēnei hōtaka I tautoko. We'll be back with Mata in a fortnight. Nohoro mai.